Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Graham Sparkman with Graham Sparkman Music Production. I'm joined today by my father once again for some more vintage Rickenbacker fun.
Yes.
This episode, actually 2 episodes, well, I'm going to divide it into 2 episodes, will feature the 1955 Rickenbacker Blonde combo, which we're going to talk extensively about and a little bit about the history of the guitar, how my father came by it. You want to stick around to the end of the episode because we'll hopefully have a chance to play and give you guys an opportunity to hear how these guitars sound. And also this stunning 1957 Rickenbacker 800 series combo, which is green. As I mentioned on the commercial for this episode, it's kind of more of a turquoisey green with a gold pickguard, and all of these guitars are 100% original. Like I said, I'm going to divide them up into 2 different episodes. And if you didn't have a chance to check out the episode that my dad and I shot together on this 1956 Rickenbacker tulip shape, check that out. I will link it in the description below. So starting out with the 1955 600 series blonde combo. Dad, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Sure.
So that you can show it off as we kind of talk about it. First of all, talk about the history of the combos when Rickenbacker first started introducing combos.
They had been in business since the early 30s in California, but they had primarily been the makers of electric pickups that could go on archtop guitars that were popular at the time, or lap steels, later got into console steels, but they weren't really in the modern era of the electric guitar until 1954, when the company changed hands shortly before that. And F.C. Hall acquired the company, and he wanted to have a guitar that would compete with the other electrics. He used to work for Fender, so he wanted something that would compete maybe with the Fender Telecaster and the Gibson Les Pauls. So he hired a team to help him create this first guitar in April of 1954. And by July of 1954, they had started producing the guitar in Los Angeles.
Okay, so this came out roughly 1 year then after they started had them going into production.
Well, they bought the company from Adolf Rickenbacker
right.
in 1953, and then in 54 they designed this and started producing them that same year in 54.
Okay.
This one was made in 55.
Okay. And so the 600 series was made alongside some of the other series, and they had slightly different specifications between them. So, for example, the 600 series would have been one of the first ones that...
I'm sure they started with that, but soon after they added the 800 series, which looked like the same guitar just about, but it appeared that it only had one pickup, as this does. Mm-hmm. But the 800 series actually had 2 single coil pickups housed in the horseshoe.
Underneath that. Right.
So both of them appear to have the one horseshoe pickup, but the 600s were one single coil. The 800s were 2 single coils.
Okay.
And the 800s, because of the 2 pickups, also had 2 toggle switches.
Okay. Let's talk about the toggle switches. This one with the tone switch being just one, is it a 3-way? Is it a 2-way switch?
Well, it's actually a 3-way, but it's just slight variations in the tone, which you can also accomplish to some degree with the knob.
With the tone knob.
You have a tone knob, and you have a 3-position toggle.
Sure. And I think I was telling you before, I always associate the 50s with, a lot of chrome and metal and heavy components. So looking at the knobs, one, if you're not well versed in vintage Rickenbacker combos specifically, you might think,
right.
Oh, those are not original knobs. But those are the ones
they are.
Everything on this guitar, in fact, is original from 1955. So this would be like an early plastic?
Yeah, exactly. And there were 3 different knobs they offered on the Rickenbacker combos.
Okay.
2 of them were chrome knobs, but different. And then there were these plastic knobs, and you never knew which one was going to show up.
Sure.
Because they kind of were very low production, and they ran out of a knob, I'm sure, and grabbed something else. But you'll see 3 distinctly different knobs in all the factory pictures.
Okay. Well, talk about the thickness of the 600 series.
Well, it was a very thick body. It was a little thicker than even maybe a Les Paul and certainly a Telecaster. And because of that, they decided to hollow it out so it wouldn't be so cumbersome and heavy.
Sure.
And therefore, they took what initially started out as a solid body and carved out an opening in the back.
You want to flip it around maybe so the camera can see there? And so I'll flash pictures up as well.
Aluminum cover that covers what they opened up.
Right.
And it allowed them to take some of the wood out, greatly reduce the weight, and also gave an access to the electronics.
Right.
Where you could fix things or repair things if you needed to.
Sure. And it looks like the neck, there is a bolt on the back of the neck, but I know there's a difference between a bolt-on neck and as you were mentioning before.
Yeah, this is a glue-in neck.
A glue-in neck.
But it has the bolt, to hold it
just
in place.
for reinforcement.
Yes.
I see.
And this is a maple neck, but the bodies were available in 3 different woods.
Okay.
During their run.
Okay.
They were maple, ash, and alder.
Oh, okay.
So, and probably somebody that's really good with discerning wood can say, well, that's definitely, an alder and ash. If it's a maple, if it's a blonde finish.
Right. And then do they all come with the black pick guards?
No. They started out with the black pick guard and the black name plate or truss rod cover.
Sure.
But then they switched kind of in the middle of the production to a gold anodized pick guard and a gold anodized truss rod cover.
Right.
But it was the same shape.
Right.
In this initial phase, in the first run, let's call it, in 54 and 55.
Okay. So I know this is going to get a little controversial. You guys are going to have to bear with me now. I know that there's different camps out there about how many of these guitars were produced. And I think maybe there's a little truth in both camps. Extremes kind of get you into weird places. But nevertheless, can we give a ballpark kind of an idea or some insight into these particular mid-50s, like 600 series, for example?
I think so. But, again, I hesitate to quote any statistics on that because they've come into dispute among one camp that thought they were too low. Right. So those do exist, and there are paperwork to document those guitars were made. Right. So, but that's not to say that's all they made. Right. That's the ones that there are records of. Records.
Invoice.
Yeah. But you don't want to get too carried away thinking they made more than they did, either on the other extreme. Right. Because I've been following and collecting and talking to owners and dealers since the mid-'80s on these guitars. Yeah. And they are very rare. Right. There was very little of these produced. Right. From 54 to 59. Exactly. So I think that's evidence also just look on YouTube. How many, Sure. How many people have you seen playing one? A celebrity? Just look, it's almost unheard of. Most people don't even know they made these guitars, even if they're familiar with Rickenbacker. Right. And that included me initially, and that's kind of how I got involved in it. I was very familiar with the other Rickenbackers in the 60s and 70s that were seen everywhere. And then I found out that they made these carved-topped, very unique, super rare, very low numbers in the late 50s. Right. Mid-late 50s. And I just was intrigued. So I wanted to find out, who had them, how I could purchase one. And I went after them in a big way. So I initially sent out letters to every vintage guitar dealer that I knew existed in the United States. Mm-hmm. Sent them pictures because they may not know what I'm talking about. Sure. They were so unusual. I sent them pictures of the combos and got my name out there with all these dealers. So I became aware because of that of how many were out there or not out there, as the case was. Right. Exactly. That makes sense. Yeah. So what year did you pick this up then? I bought it in 88. Okay. I started the search around 85, and I ended up buying 3 of the combos in 1988. And that I would have been 10 years old to date myself at the time. So I would have been a kid playing around. I remember when you were collecting these, at age 10. Yeah, and I bought a few others after that. Sure. So I ended up owning, I guess, 5 at one time. So that's kind of in the infancy of the collecting. It was when I first got this one and others in 88. And did you immediately take it out and start playing it on the road with your band at that time? No. Okay. No, not at all. To me, I was using a Telecaster and a Stratocaster and a Rickenbacker 12-string, a current one. Mm-hmm. So I played those as my go-to guitars when we were playing on the road. But these were more of something I wanted to collect.
Sure.
And just play at the house, and instead of taking them out and wear and tear and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. That makes sense. Well, when you did plug it into an amp, what amp did you use?
Well, I've used it in several different amps. At the time I was in the band traveling, I used a lot of Lab Series amps.
Right.
So that was my amp of choice at the time, but I've used it with Marshall and other brands as well.
Right, right. So your memory, and I don't know how long it's been since you've plugged it in and played it, but your memory of how it would sound both tonally and how it handled with the action and the response compared to, let's say, brands of guitars that folks might be more familiar with, like Stratocasters or Telecasters or Les Pauls.
Yeah.
What was the tonal quality? What was your thoughts on the way? And we're going to try to plug it in and play it here towards the end, so we'll give you folks an example. But just what was your memories of how it compared?
Well, I was satisfied with the tone. Until I bought the first one, I didn't know what to expect at all. I really never heard anybody play one. But I was happy with the tonal quality. I would say it was kind of in the middle of the road. It didn't sound like a Telecaster for sure.
Right.
And it didn't sound like a Les Paul.
Sure.
But it was kind of an in the middle of the road tone. It would, do a nice treble, do a nice bass. One thing that was kind of unusual about it, and I found this to be the case with about all 5 of the ones I've owned, is they all seem to lose volume on the bass strings.
Okay.
On your E, A, and D strings, they just wouldn't be as loud.
Sure.
And so when I saw it on multiple guitars, I knew it wasn't just that guitar.
That particular, guitar.
And I still don't know if they sounded that way new or age affected the pickup in that area.
If there's anybody out there watching this episode that owns a vintage Rickenbacker combo, let us know in the comments if that's been your experience as well, because I'd be curious to know if other folks out there.
So knowing that if you're going to play it in any certain setting, you've got to kind of compensate for that and know that the volume's going to drop probably on your bass strings. Yeah,
and what I would do, just thinking more in terms of music production and audio engineering, is put a dynamic compressor on it, because especially the older dynamic compressors were more sensitive to bass frequencies that would trigger that, and then as you adjust up the makeup gain, then you're going to have a more balanced.
And I want to mention that some people might think, well, you need to adjust your bridge and get it closer to the pickup. That's not what we're talking about.
Okay.
That's not the factor.
So you think it was the pickups that Rickenbacker was using?
Yeah, it was going on in the pickup, whether it happened initially or it developed with age.
Yeah.
If it lost some of its magnetism or whatever, but it's not how close the strings are to the pickup based on the bridge position.
Okay, that's very interesting. But otherwise, the playability, the width of the neck, the way it felt as you played it,
I was happy with
the action, all those kind of things. Yeah, right. Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, the neck. It got a very thin neck on it, which is kind of synonymous with Rickenbackers. But it's not so small as the modern era Rickenbackers are.
Sure.
It's a wider neck than that, but it's what I say. The back of it, the thickness of the neck is, it's not like a big fat early 50s Telecaster neck.
Exactly. And unlike the tulip shape, the 400 series, this one actually has functional strap pins so that you can
that is true
stand up and play it without having to have a saxophone strap.
These guitars, as we know now, were produced in extremely low numbers, and there's a lot of changes that happened in the evolution of the guitars.
Right.
They actually made 3 different thicknesses between 1954 and the last one. The last ones were probably made in 58. I think that there was one that was sold or serial numbered as a 59, but it was probably still made in that initial run, and maybe they didn't sell it to 59, but that they didn't make them in the 60s. So, but this one has, as the earliest ones did, the input plate there is in the end pin section on the back of the guitar, not on the typical bottom or on top of the instrument. But then they changed that soon. It evolved, and they put it in a more normal place to put the plug in.
Exactly. Any other thoughts before we plug this thing in and let it rip?
No. Again, it's just interesting to know as you see what all they did produce in very low numbers between 54 and, say, 58 or 59, the evolution was, kind of interesting. They made changes along the way.
Sure.
Initially, all of them were blonde, and then they brought in a green one just as an experimental first custom color, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then decided they liked that and made the turquoise ones, which was a dark blue-green, as one of the two available colors. And then after that, a few were produced in fire glow.
That's what I was going to.
And autumn glow.
Right, because and this would be a good segue. There's a book that if you're serious about learning more about the history of these guitars, and not just about combos, but the entire vintage Rickenbacker lineup,
right.
You should pick up this book. It's called Rickenbacker Guitars: Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire Glow, which is a brilliant title, I think. And who wrote this book? By Martin Kelly and Paul Kelly.
Produced in England.
Yeah, and it might be a little bit difficult to find. You might have to scour the internet a little bit to try to hunt this down, but will be well worth your while, because it doesn't only provide all of the historical information, but every single page is just filled with these beautiful color photographs and tons of background information in terms of who played what at what time, and when these guitars were rolling out. So definitely worth your time to pick up this book. Did anybody famous at all play a 600 series mid-50s combo?
The only example of that I know of is the band Steppenwolf.
Yeah.
Used one for a brief time, and they used it on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Now for all of you teenagers, the long-haired Steppenwolf rock and roller. So let's have a fine welcome.
Get your motor running, head out on the highway, looking for adventure, and whatever comes our way. Yeah, gotta go make it happen.
And the band was under contract, so to speak, as endorsing Rickenbacker instruments. Mm-hmm. So the whole band played Rickenbackers, and they all used Rickenbacker amps at one period.
Sure.
But it is my understanding that the guitar player with Steppenwolf at that time was actually using one that he saw at the factory that was either on display or hadn't been sold, and it was one of the fire glow or autumn glow variety.
Right.
But it appears to be the exact same if you look in great detail, one that's still on the wall in the Rickenbacker Factory Museum. So I don't think that was his personal guitar, although he played Rickenbackers on the road with the band. But he used it on the Ed Sullivan Show. And other than that, I don't know if anybody can name a celebrity that used them. In the 50s, Mr. Hall got in touch, or they got in touch with him, with various country bands and Western swing bands that used Rickenbacker instruments. So there's factory photos and pictures out there, lesser-known bands that played combos.
Sure.
Along with usually their steel player using a Rickenbacker steel. But the lack of a celebrity playing these guitars, made people not aware of them.
Sure.
And also made them a little less desirable in terms of what people are looking for. If a famous person played an instrument, then that's what everybody wants.
Right.
And so that affects the values too.
Sure, that makes sense. So folks, we're going to go ahead and plug this thing in and get it cooking. Hope you enjoyed the entire episode, folks. You'll definitely want to like and subscribe and ring the notification bell because, as I said, I am just getting ready to review. Next up, this 1957 800 series combo, which we're going to post that whole episode here shortly. So you don't want to let that one fall through the cracks. Thanks again for watching, folks. Thanks to my dad for coming up to help me shoot this episode. This is Graham Sparkman with Graham Sparkman Music Production saying, "Tschüss."